Nick Sirianni gave up play calling for the Philadelphia Eagles in 2021, and in 2022, they're 5-0. Should Zac Taylor follow suit? Plus some stats that shine some light on the offense's struggles on Sunday Night Football in Week 5.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, bringing you coverage of your Cincinnati Bengals every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts, and let's have the conversation, James. People around the internet, around Bengals fandom, screaming for probably, I don't know what number of times this is, for the umpteenth time in various down spots throughout Zac Taylor's tenure in Cincinnati for Zac Taylor to give up play calling. And there aren't very many examples of this happening successfully around the NFL. That's why I mentioned Nick Sirianni specifically, because that's one where handoff to Shane Waldron goes well. They're 5-0 this year. I don't think this is coming necessarily, but the cries are getting louder. And there is an example where Sirianni, for the reasons Bengals fans are talking about, where he wants to, and this is a quote, make a change in the sense of how to free me up to be a better head coach, and I had a good assistant to call the plays.
Sure. I get it. I get why people are calling for that. And here's what I think needs to happen is Zac Taylor needs to look in the mirror. This entire coaching staff needs to, as do the entire offense, because we're going to get to some of these stats. And it's just insane. It's insane that this offense with those guys, 9-1 and 28 and 85 and 83, too talented to be where they're at from an offensive standpoint at this stage of the season. We're not talking about a few games now. You know, we're talking about 5 games. We're talking about a month plus of football. So you can't blame Camp. You can't make all these excuses. And so, yeah, the blame has to go somewhere. And look, I'm not going to come on here and say Zac Taylor needs to give up play calling, because I don't know. I don't know if Brian Callahan would be a good play caller. He's never called plays. So now in the middle of a season with a bunch of expectations, do you want this new play caller that, has a huge part of in the offense, but he's going to have to work through some things too if he starts calling plays. So there's that. Not that I'm afraid to do that, but that's part of it. The other part is, and I think the bigger conversation has to do with just Zac Taylor in general. I thought each year he's been in Cincinnati, he's grown as a head coach. And I haven't felt that this year from last year. Feels a lot like last year, doesn't it? Where it was these ebbs and flows and games that would make you pull your hair out, and it felt like the world's ending. And then except the highs so far this year haven't been as high. They're not creating those explosives. They aren't doing those things that even when you lose, you're like, okay, well, at least the offense is showing flashes. There haven't been many flashes, and there weren't really any, in my eyes, from an offensive standpoint on Sunday, outside of the ground game a little bit. So will he give up play calling? I don't think so. Could it solve some things? It could. It's also a risk because, like I said, Brian Callahan hasn't done it. So I'm more bummed that, at least to this point, it seems like everyone's kind of where they were a year ago, and they haven't taken a step forward, or they've taken a step backwards, and that includes Zac Taylor.
Yeah. And real quick correction, Shane Steichen, not Shane Waldron. Wrong Shane, offensive coordinator. There's 2 of them in the NFL. The reason, though, I think that we haven't seen the ups this year kind of gets to some of the things we're going to talk about later, is that, ebbs and flows last year for sure. Where did those peaks come from for this offense? It's when teams gave them one-on-one opportunities with Jamar Chase all year into the Super Bowl. where teams gave them one-on-one opportunities with T. Higgins, and teams were just playing single high a lot. There's crazy splits for the Bengals going against single high. And, that's why last night after the game, we talked about the one positive from the offense being they found some success in the run gun game, in the shotgun run game. If they can build on that and get 5-6 yards a carry when teams are playing too high against them, then you can, play too high. We'll run the balls for 6 yards a carry. And at some point, you're going to have to do something about that because we will run the entire game if we have to. You need to be able to show that patience if you can't figure out how to throw the ball effectively against those two high shells. And the other thing is when you're running the ball effectively against those two high shells, your play action game should be better. You should be able to set up the play action plays, even if it's an intermediate part of the field, even if it's not going over the top, because Joe Burrow doesn't have Josh Allen's arm to throw the ball over the top of a two high shell and go 60 yards down the field, a little bit late or with a flick of a wrist or whatever. So, those are adjustments that'll need to be made either way. But as far as changing the play caller, I'm not sure that solves the problem. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Like you said, James, we don't know how Callahan would be as a play caller, if that is something they're even considering. I don't think they are. But even if Callahan is a good play caller, I guess that's how we would figure out, is it the plays that are being called? Is it the structure of the offense, the way this team wants to play offense? Is it a problem with the quarterback? Joe Burrow has not been good against two high defenses his entire NFL career. And he's been playing for Zac Taylor his entire NFL career. So, chicken or egg there, root cause analysis needs to be done. But that's also something that needs to be considered. And something I'm going to be looking at when I watch a tape is what are they trying to run into cover 6 that the Ravens running so much of? 27 plays, I think, against the pass for the Ravens in two high defenses, cover 2, cover 4, cover 6. And that's probably a good transition to our stats, right, James? Because these splits are insane for this offense, for this passing offense, when they're facing a two high versus a single high shell. And that's why we've been talking about it so much. So maybe we'll talk about those splits coming up next.
But first, a word from Tommy John, because fall, it can be chaos, much like the Bengals offense right now. You're overheating 1 second, freezing the next. You got to be ready for anything, and you need underwear that can handle everything. It's time for Tommy John. In Tommy John underwear, you're that much more comfortable, so you can do everything better. Name a problem with other underwear, and Tommy John's solved it. It's breathable, lightweight fabric, has 4 times the stretch of competing brands, and they came with no wedgie guarantee, thanks to the non-rolling waistband and legs that never ride up, plus a horizontal quick draw fly. You got to check them out right now. TommyJohn.com/lockedon right now for 20% off your first order. That's 20% off everything backed by Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear, or it's free guarantee. 20% off at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details.
All right, James, you've got some stats, right? I've got some stats too. Let's start with your stats. What do you got?
Wow. Look at you starting with my stats. Now I thought for sure you were going to do it. So the James Analytics is going to continue day 2 now. I had a couple people tweet me about that. That might stick.
I think we need a weekly James Analytics segment now. It's going to get crazy. I'm sure it'll be wild.
We might. We might.
We need a new James Analytics piece of jewelry to go with your hot take chain. So I'm
going to get with Schultz and Sons and make sure. I'm going to reach out to Matt and his crew and see if I can get a no shovel pass chain. I'll wear that to the state. I mean, you can't have shovel passes, man. Anyways, you want to talk about a play that no one believed in as it was happening? None of those dudes believed in that play. Anyways, a couple stats. One, in this James Analytics segment, we're actually going to steal it from Mike Renner. Get that? We're stealing the stat because Mike Renner of PFF tweeted this out, and Joe Burrow's EPA per dropback, and it's expected points added for those wondering. It's 0.160 against single high, 2 high, and this just chimes into right what you said at the end there before I started talking about Tommy John. Too high, it's minus 0.184. It's a struggle in too high in going against it. And I don't know what it is. I think it's a mixture of everything. Like, I think it's just the coaching staff is clearly they're struggling to put together the right cover two beaters. It puts Burrow in a position that he's not the most comfortable, and they clearly don't love the idea of running the ball a ton. And so, especially because they haven't been able to at an efficient level, and you mix it all together, and it's just been this simple yet so complex thing that just throws a wrench into the Bengals offense. And it shouldn't be that simple to slow it down, and yet it has been through 5 weeks.
Yeah, so all offseason, right, we were talking about
All offseason.
the offensive line should be better.
Yeah.
They know they're going to get too high, but the offensive line should be better. That should mean that the coaching staff has more flexibility with what they want to do on offense. They should be able to run some longer developing plays. They should be able to do better in the play action game because they should be able to run the ball better. All these things that we thought would be better, predicated on thinking the offensive line would be better. And the offensive line has not been much better. I mean, it's probably been a little bit better. The first 2 games were very bad, and Micah Parsons, TJ Watt were problems. They've probably been a little bit better than last year, but that shovel pass is a great example. You talk about La'el Collins maybe doesn't have the right assignment, but Cordell Volson is also, beat inside, which has been his big issue, beat inside off the snap, and he's trying to run his guy out of the play through the back of the pocket. Stanley Morgan's trying to work across the pocket. Stanley Morgan has to hesitate while Cordell Volson clears where he's trying to run, throws off the timing of the play. Maybe there's even a chance for Stanley Morgan to catch the ball and get in if Cordell Volson doesn't have to run his guy out the back of the pocket instead of just sealing him at the line of scrimmage. So timing is disrupted in the first place. Ted Karras loses his rep. La'el Collins maybe doesn't have the right assignment. So offensive line, right? And so the adjustments that I was hoping to see from this offense, especially the way they were talking about knowing this too high stuff was coming, with the improvements we were expecting on the offensive line, maybe they're slowly coming along, and I think they are. It's just too slow. It's 4 drives into the game when we're talking about a game-to-game basis. It's taking, we're 5 weeks into the season now, and I feel like, the game planning for these games, and I haven't watched the tape yet, probably needs to be come into the game with a plan to beat these coverages at the start of the game. And I think that's what they're trying to do with some of the early run game where they didn't get it going. It took them a while to get it going. They thought they had some ideas that they thought would work in the run game, and then they didn't work. And so it took them 4 drives to adapt and find what did work. But that's feels like most games this year, the last 2 weeks aside, where they had some early success and found those early touchdowns. But you can't burn 4 drives at the beginning of a game. It makes it too hard in the NFL where all these teams, Robert Mays and Nate Tice talking about this on the Athletic Football Show last night, all these teams outside of like Buffalo, Kansas City, maybe Philadelphia are so tight. There's so little differentiating most teams in the NFL right now that you're going to have these games coming down to the wire like week 1, week 2, week 5. And the slow starts are part of that. And so quicker adjustments, having passing game answers, and they're trying different things every week. It's just frustrating that it's taking so long for them to figure it out in game. And so that needs to be better. Ravens and these division teams, by the way, just to go back to your stat, these division teams really focusing on the Bengals offense. So Ravens are not this team that's going to sit in too high the whole game against most teams in the NFL. Against the Bengals, 60% of their snaps in cover 2, 4, or 6, and showing too high pre-snap on 71% of their plays. That's from Arjun Menon at PFF, who Bengals fans love to hate because of his general derisiveness toward the Bengals offense because of what they did against too high last year. Now they're getting a lot more of it, and they're struggling with it. And so that is something that I thought the offensive line would help. I thought they would adjust to, and we haven't seen those adjustments.
They need to – yeah, we haven't seen those adjustments, and everyone saw it coming. And now you've seen it for 5 straight weeks, and it's still the case. And it's not just like too high. Like the offense in general, they're one of the worst offenses in the NFL, Jake.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not debate. That's insane to me. And so a couple more numbers here. They're 31st in yards per play. Only the Rams are worse. And if you watch the Rams are awful. They're an awful football team right now. Cooper Kupp is the only reason that offense is doing anything. And without him, it's just brutal. Well, the Bengals, they don't have just one guy. They have all these guys. It should be they should be able to find ways to make plays. 31st in yards per play, 4.81 yards per play. Ridiculous. It's a joke. They're averaging just 21.6 points per game, which is tied for 16th in the NFL. Also ridiculous. They averaged 26 per game last year. And so Carolina, who just fired their coach today, they're averaging more yards per play. The Colts. Did you see the Colts offense on Thursday night? It was brutal. It was the Russell Wilson versus Matt Ryan pick show. The Steelers with Pickett and Trubisky. I mean, these are teams and offenses that shouldn't even be mentioned in the same conversation as the Bengals. It should be night and day. It should be you mentioned, who'd you say? The Chiefs, the Bills, that's what we should be talking about from an offensive standpoint.
The Seahawks? Legitimately,
but
Geno Smith is playing out of his damn mind.
They're putting up numbers.
Insane. It's crazy.
And yet this little cover 2 look and it's like, what's going on? And so that's the really frustrating part is at some point they're going to have to stop saying it. And I can't get, and we talked about it last night, I can't get this quote out of my mind though, the Joe Burrow, and I'm paraphrasing, but if they're going to play that, we can't beat them over the top. Well, then how about we just, you call a bunch of intermediate stuff and you start winning in that 11 to 20 yard range, because how many air yards did the passes to Jamar Chase travel?
2,
right? Downfield. It didn't feel like many. The back shoulder on their final drive to go ahead. I mean, there weren't many intermediate throws to Chase. It was a lot of quick stuff. Well, come on now. Like there's got to be a way where you're not that slowed down where you can get the ball in the intermediate part of the field, especially if they're going to play that too high. So they have to figure it out. They're going to throw the ball. That's fine. But you can't just give teams this blueprint and show that you can't solve it at all. And so I expect the Saints, and they have a pretty good secondary, they have a pretty good defense, they're going to do the exact same thing.
We have more to talk about with this offense. Probably, again, as we often should, spend more time on the defense. I want to watch the tape before commenting further on the defense, but the defense held a good offense in check. So just going to throw that in here again, but I do have some more stats as well on the offense and things like that we should talk about. So let's finish the show with a little bit more in terms of an overall retrospective on the first 5 weeks, how productivity is looking and what they might be able to do to figure it out to finish up the show coming up next.
BetOnline is your number one source for all things football betting this season, whether it's college football, whether it's the NFL, whether it's Joe Burrow and the Bengals trying to rebound and trying to get back to 500 this week against the Saints. They are your continued source for all things sports wagering. I've used them and you should too. It's super easy. It's free to sign up. And whether it's wagering on, NFL futures, NBA futures, the Major League Baseball playoffs, anything in between, they have you covered from boxing to MMA at BetOnline. It's fast. It's easy. It's where the game starts. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So a couple other stats I wanted to hit on here, James. You're talking yards per play, points per game, and these things. I think those are certainly useful because that tells you
21.
It tells you how productive they're being, really, in the end. But
God.
What's concerning is when you look at stuff like DVOA, which tries to take some adjusted stuff into account as well. The Bengals are also behind the Pittsburgh Steelers in offensive DVOA. Not by much. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, mostly led by Mitch Trubisky, ahead of the Bengals in this particular metric. And a lot of this goes back to the first few weeks of the season that they haven't recovered from. The last couple of weeks have been respectable. Even week 5, And this was a little bit surprising to me. Even week 5, in terms of DVOA, the Bengals outplayed the Ravens in DVOA, according to Football Outsiders in week 5, narrowly, like coin flip result, which is kind of how the game went. But also in Kevin Cole's, he's PFF guy, doing the adjusted score thing. He had the Bengals 29, Ravens 23 based on his adjusted score formula that takes into account, expected points and all this stuff, trying to smooth out for variance. So maybe the process wasn't as bad as it felt, but it sure didn't feel like the Bengals were anywhere close to scoring 29 points in that game.
No.
I mean, the
In
first 4 drives, you can't have that slow of a start. It's killing them.
and the Ravens were like 19, fine, but Lamar Jackson donated 7. So really they had 26. And so it's like, I mean, it was 2 different plays where they get past the deep guy and have touchdowns if Lamar can just put it on either guy and Duvernay and Wallace. So it helps. It makes it look a little better, but that was, such a huge turning point. And you could say the same thing for the Bengals, right? It is, the goal line stand and all of those things, but no, it never felt, and I don't know how it came across on TV, but it never felt like the Bengals were in control. It felt like they were on their heels all game. Even when it was 10-10, it felt like it was like, okay, got to halftime 10-10. Now let's try to catch our breath and figure it out. And they obviously didn't on offense.
I felt great about their passing D the entire game. They had issues with Mark Andrews at times. They had a couple, like you said, letting guys get behind him. Those are more individual plays. I thought that the approach in general from the pass defense was really good, but when you let guys get behind you on 2 straight plays for could have been touchdowns, that is going to sour things when we look at it on tape. When you get the coverage bust on the Mark Andrews touchdown, which I thought was just a pick play that Trey Flowers couldn't work through. Apparently, he thought he was handing it off, according to many people in my Twitter replies.
Stopped. Yeah, he stopped. Yeah. Yep.
So miscommunication there that leads to a touchdown. You let the only real threat. I mean, it was Mark Andrews all game. Devin Duvernay had a couple plays, but man. So that's the defense. The running D without DJ Reader is going to be what it is. These other guys need to play better. And we'll see how it holds up when we watch the tape, because it was interesting looking at the PFF grades on Monday morning, not liking some of the guys that I thought played pretty good games. Sam Hubbard, Trey Hendrickson, some of the linebackers not grading out very well in run D. And so that'll be interesting to look at. But the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of stats is Joe Burrow's intermediate game. Going back to LSU, fantastic intermediate passer. 22.5% of his passes at LSU in his senior year were in the intermediate part of the field. He completed nearly 70% of those for 12.5 yards per attempt. And last year, when the Bengals were going well, he was the best passer in the NFL in the intermediate part of the field. Again, completing 72% of his passes for 13 yards per attempt in the intermediate part of the field, 10 to 19 yards downfield. 13 yards per attempt, just 3 yards worse per attempt than his deep passing, which is where all those explosives come from for this team. 14 touchdowns on deep passes, 11 touchdowns on intermediate passes last year for Joe Burrow. Was great in that part of the field. This year, intermediate passes, 58% completion percentage, 10 yards per attempt, and has 5 turnover-worthy throws in the intermediate part of the field. That needs to be so much better.
Yeah, it does, especially because that's one of the areas that they should be exploiting, right? That's one of the areas that's going to help get defenses out of this cover 2. Let's take away the explosives and keep everything in front of us. And they haven't been able to do it. And you're right, he has been, poor there. But I don't even remember even many throws in general, attempts in that part of the field on Sunday night. And you have to go back and track it and look, but there weren't many. It wasn't like he's got, Jamar Chase on a post for, 18 yards downfield. Like, we didn't see it. And so part of that is no T Higgins, but I mean, think about it. Were there any Did Boyd get targeted 15 yards downfield, like over the middle on a seam or something? I don't remember any of that, or seeing one. And so that has to change. And defenses, it should be impossible to take those away and also take away the deep shots. Something has to be there. There's only 11 guys, Jake. There's only 11 on the field. And so I don't care where you put them. Something's available.
And they're playing 9 on 10 a lot of the times because they're putting 2 of those guys on Jamar Chase. They're clouding Jamar Chase or bracketing Jamar Chase. They're playing double man on Jamar Chase so often that, yeah, I mean, there's something there. You can go look at the passing chart. The next gen passing chart is out for Joe Burrow. There were way too many dots very near or behind the line of scrimmage. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 passes behind the line of scrimmage on the left side, 9 passes, behind the line of scrimmage on the left side, and 4, 5 more at or behind the line of scrimmage on the right side. I mean, this is a passing game.
14
out of 35 of Joe Burrow's attempts at or behind the line of scrimmage, and another probably 9 to 12 within 6 yards, 7 yards of the line of scrimmage.
What is that? What is this Rex Burkhead and,
his deepest pass, 15 yards downfield.
Yeah, who else played in that 2014 playoff game where AJ was out and all those guys? Like
I've scrubbed it from my memory.
That's the game plan you do when you have nothing, when there's no one. I push the ball. Now, if the intermediate is as deep as you can go because of cover, fine. Guess what? 15 yards is great. I was give me 15 yards all day long through the air because you have guys that are going to break tackles. And so they got to figure it out. It's too talented. You just have to figure it out before it's too late. And starting 2-3 and 0-2 in the division, it's not too late yet, but we're getting closer. We're certainly getting closer. I mean, and all you have to do, honestly, look at it. Hurst, 6 receptions. Oh, that's awesome. 53 yards. Jamar Chase, 7 catches. Oh, that's ideal. 50 yards. Right. And then it just goes downhill from there. But if you have 2 guys that have 6 and 7 receptions, they should be averaging 10 plus, and neither guy was close.
Yeah, maybe not for tight end necessarily. Like ideally, sure. Yeah, but maybe not. But for Chase, last year 7 catches is 140 yards.
Sure. And what I mean with Hurst, I mean, he's leading you in receiving. So like it was wild. And yeah, normally I agree with you. Like 6 for 53 for Hurst is great. That's fine. But you would also have a T. Higgins and a Tyler Boyd and a Jamar Chase that would be above him, receptions and or yards.
Right. The last thing real quick, the PFF grades, just in case you're wondering, I'm going to watch the tape probably tonight. We'll hopefully get to talk about it tomorrow. Pass blocking grades, pretty good. Rough start for on a couple plays, but this is how it felt throughout the game. It felt like after the first little part of the game there, they settled in. Kappa, Jonah Williams, Volson, Karras, all above 70. Kappa and Jonah above 80 in the PFF pass blocking grade, and Collins even with the 65, which for him is pretty good this year. Hopefully he continues to get healthier or better or something. He needs to be better long term. But against a pass rush that didn't have a ton of teeth, where we thought the interior was better, nice to see the interior holding up mostly pretty well for this team. And it felt that way watching live as well. Just gotta figure out the passing game. Hopefully this running game improvement is a building block. That's really the hope for me, is that they see that, okay, we can run out of the gun. Let's go more run. Let's go more gap stuff out of the gun in the run game. Let's build the passing game off of that, build the play action game off of that. And that's the hope for me. And we'll see what next week brings. New Orleans Saints back in Louisiana for these guys. Anyway, we'll get into the tape. Plenty of time to transition to week 6 as well. More coming your way as we continue your daily coverage of the Cincinnati Bengals here on the Locked On Bengals podcast. And we appreciate you listening. Until next time, hoo-day and have a good one.